haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi, Kaz here with my friend Anka Richter, who's the author of the fantastic book, Cult Trip. She's bringing us an exciting event this year.
Thanks, Kaz. Australasia, get ready for Decult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website decult.net for all the info.
Come cult-proof your life at Decult 2024. I'll be there. Welcome back to Cult Chat. It's so lovely to be actually in person today with you two wonderful wahine. And I'm very excited with what we've got scheduled to talk about today. The thing is, Gloriavale is currently right in the middle of a big media exposure.
Yes.
And it's confronting and it's chilling and it's very, very moving, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yes, it's everywhere. There's loads of radio pieces and media articles, and the reason why, Liz, do you want to give us an overview?
Yes, the Gloriavale documentary Escaping Utopia just landed here in New Zealand on TV1 over the last 3 nights, and so everywhere I've been, people are talking about it, wanting to discuss it. It's all over social media. As you said, every radio station, news outlet, TV station is covering it, and what it does is it again reminds us of the history of Gloriavale, and the idea of understanding the history is so you can understand where it's ended up now.
And when you said, like you just said then, it's a Gloriavale documentary, but I just want to clarify with you, this is not a documentary that's been put out by Gloriavale. They don't own it. It's not a piece put out by Gloriavale themselves. You mean it's a documentary done on Gloriavale, and as well you mentioned then that it's about the history, but they also interviewing former members, people who have, like, they track people who are currently leaving, like it's right up to the minute, as well as delving back into the origins, right?
It is. I think that's what's different about this piece. The camera crew were able to get in and establish a relationship with Boaz, and you'll see that on the series as he is coming to grips with the decision to leave Gloriavale, and then the cameras are able to follow some of his, re-establishment into society.
So it's not a propaganda piece from the Gloriavale community. It's an expose from an investigative team who've gone in, and they've done it over 3 one-hour series that's on TVNZ this week and is now on demand for New Zealand viewers, so they can watch it on demand.
And it will be available internationally as well.
Okay.
And I think what's important to notice is the propaganda pieces, in some way, all of this probably can be blamed on Gloriavale themselves, because back in 2014, 15 and 16, there were 3 glossy documentaries, I call them, funded by New Zealand On Air as well, and put out, and where that camera crew got to go inside Gloriavale and on Gloriavale's terms, put together 3 1-hour documentary episodes. But of course it was glossy, it looked amazing. People were giving birth on these programs, they were getting married, it looked like the happy place to be.
So that was, you said that was 2014, 2015, 2016. Okay, so nearly 10 years ago. You're saying that TVNZ also did a 3-part TV series, but it was working with Gloriavale to portray what Gloriavale themselves wanted to portray about their own lives. Because that was were the main characters, was that Dove Love and Pearl, and like, I mean, everyone was talking about it, right? And it was almost became it was an entertainment piece as well. Like, people would go to dress-up parties and dress up like Dove Love and all that sort of thing.
And I remember the Facebook group, memes for Gloriavale teams.
Right, yes. And that's still available to watch on TVNZ, I'm sure it is. I saw it the other day.
Yes, there are 3, A World Apart, Life and Death, and A Woman's Place.
Right.
A Woman's Place, that sends a chill through my heart, just that title.
And I think what was interesting about those ones is right at that time people began to leave Gloriavale. It's around the time that, say, Rosanna and Elijah left, and they're featuring in this current documentary series. And you know, people were leaving, people were staying even at our house, I think, when the 2015 doco came out. And there were lots of other leavers coming around. We had a house full of people. And I just remember, it's one thing to watch a doco about Gloriavale in your own home by yourself. It's another thing to be in the room with leavers. They have a comment on everything. And I just remember people jumping up and sort of shouting at the screen, "That's a lie! Oh, what a load of rubbish! Oh, that's not true!" And they were just incensed that the other side was not being shown. And so I think from that followed people coming out on like TV. There were, just sort of short clips. John Campbell picked up on some stories and various others, and leavers started saying, that is not the Gloriavale I grew up in.
Yes.
That is the glossy view. That is the dream of the perfect utopia.
Do you remember what prompted the Gloriavale to come out with that propaganda piece, or those propaganda? What was going on that they felt that they needed to share with the world how wonderful it was?
Well, somebody must have given them the opportunity, right, from TVNZ.
It was an independent company, Pacific Screen, and so perhaps they thought about it and thought that would be really interesting.
So this wasn't actually the 2014, 15, 16. So the propaganda pieces, which is what I'll call them, they were not the first time that Gloriavale was in the news or on the media. We have been hearing about Gloriavale for decades in media. So do you know a little bit more about that background of the media expose?
Yes, there had been sort of country calendar propaganda pieces. Gloriavale's, involved in the rural sector, and so that of course made the community look interesting. Hopeful wasn't afraid of talking about how wonderful he thought the community was. So he took opportunities to, magazine articles or
sounds a bit like Bert Potter.
Whatever.
He had a relationship with the media as well.
And so then by 1993, Melanie Reid, an investigative journalist, decided to go undercover into Gloriavale. And so there's quite an extended piece of footage there as she goes in and lives there for a while. She's making out that she's doing dairy research.
So this was 1993.
Yeah, and we learned this in Escaping Utopia, the documentary. So Liz, if you watch the docu-series, you'll actually learn about this. But Liz is giving us a bit more background.
Yes, so she goes in there undercover, and like you say, we see some of that footage in this documentary because it forms the story. This documentary series is going right back and creating the story of some of the media exposure as well.
This documentary, the 2024 documentary series we're talking about.
That's right.
We'll have to keep on referencing that as well, otherwise we'll confuse our audience.
Called Escaping Utopia.
The 1993 piece, fascinating and very courageous of Melanie Reid as a young woman to go undercover into this community. And then she also interviewed people who had left and was hearing some unbelievably shocking stuff of sexual practices and things that were sort of openly going on there. So she tried to expose that then, and some of the former members tried to expose it then. And also it's of interest to note that it was in 1994, only a year later, that the leader was imprisoned for sexual abuse. right? So
can I point out the timeline with Centrepoint also
Yes.
going on in the media at the same
oh
time?
yes,
Yeah.
1990s,
1989 to 1992 was when all the trials were happening and the police raids. Centrepoint
my
was all over the news for a commune, a community causing abuse to children. Bert Potter was put away around 1992 for drug trials.
Yeah.
And during that, his sentence, I don't know how long it was, I think it was, around then, or maybe he was put away a little bit earlier. I think he went away in 1990. So the sexual abuse trial, I think, was around 92.
Wow.
So Melanie Reid comes in to Gloriavale,
and discovers the
exposes
same stuff.
Or
Yes.
realises that it's been happening, because there had been people through time do various articles,
Yeah.
so that it wasn't a surprise. Melanie knew that there were things going on.
Yes, and on your archives site, on your website, you've got news archives going way back where people were coming out saying there's this stuff going on here. And
There were listener articles, there was all sorts. But I think what we need to remember is it was in the time where there was no social media,
no internet.
no internet.
Yeah.
So if you missed the 2020 documentary, you're done.
You're done. There wasn't on demand. If you missed the news splash, across the Sunday Star Times, you missed it. So guess who missed it?
Everyone in Gloriavale.
Everyone in Gloriavale. So, last
Easy to
night's
pull the wool over
documentary,
your eyes.
Escaping Utopia, is possibly the first lot of documentaries that they get to watch and see a visual history if they can get their hands on it. And there is more open, sort of internet access, and incredibly, it has been announced that a cell phone tower is being erected, and cell phone access is going to be directed into the Gloriavale Valley by mid this year, 2024.
Is Gloriavale
the
putting that in?
No, but it was, where government agencies who recommended it and tried to secure funding for it, and it looks like the telco industries have slightly adjusted the path. I think they're increasing network supply across the highways of New Zealand, but they've gone to the byways because Gloriavale is not a highway. But that is going to be possibly a game changer. And I think we need to have donations of phones from all the major telco companies. You know where to find us. We would love to have a continued underground network of your phones going into Gloriavale, so that those who haven't had access to their own devices and don't have access to finances can have communication with the outside world.
Information is critical.
And so this documentary series will be the first time that I would say the third generation have ever heard anything, apart from the odd whisper rumour and that they may have heard
even the own history of their own group.
about their own history.
Right.
Here's why. First generation knew about it. Those who've left, many people were not involved in some of that stuff, or they left because they could see where it was heading. So, we need to keep that in mind, that for people who left Gloriavale 30 or 40 years ago, this possibly was quite an extremely difficult watch, because they don't want people thinking that they were participants in some of these behaviours.
And they'll be probably quite quiet about their involvement.
Potentially.
Yeah, because it's shameful.
Did you find that with Centrepoint?
Oh, there's still that. Absolutely. This I've heard repeatedly the narrative of, I got out when I realised it was not safe. I got my children out and I left, and which is problematic for someone who was there at the time to think, well, that's all very well for you to get out, but what about the children you left behind? Yeah, so that's just my perspective. But that is something that people who got out 30 years ago and now it's coming to light may well be struggling with their own guilt, their shame, that the concern that any reference or relationship to Gloriavale will mean people will assume that what they've seen on television, any of the dodgy stuff, the reference of harm, that they were willing participants in it, which is not it's not a fair conclusion at all.
No, it's not, because not everybody was involved in those. But the reality is the first generation knew there was a sexualised environment being created. And so you've got that first generation. That first generation, as you can see in Escaping Utopia, were to teach. They were told they needed to teach their children about a more sort of open sexual, things. And so that's a difficulty, because I think some of that second generation are aware. But I would say some of the second generation and down to third generation, there's a wall of silence. Everybody's zipped up, and people rarely...
So just to name what you're talking about, for anybody who didn't listen, it was the documentary showed that in the early history of Gloriavale with the first generation, that incredibly open sexual practices
within marriage was what was.
Was it within marriage? They
No,
showed couples. You know, it was like sort of big orgies, basically.
No, they were married couples having instruction in their own pile on the floor under the blankets with hopeful directing.
I'm pretty sure I heard one of the people on the documentary, the guy who left, was it Judah, saying that people were.
No, he said it was like one big mass orgy, but it does need to be clarified that there's never been any belief or understanding or knowledge or evidence that there was ever sort of mass, not centre point style.
And promiscuity versus open
husbands and wives. It was not okay to be having affairs outside of a marriage relationship at Gloriavale.
But it was okay to all be having sex in front of each other, and the leader, hopeful Christian, he was physically touching.
There was that going on, but he was the great educator. He had a desire to help people improve their marriages.
That was his view.
That was his view, yes, so that there wouldn't be this prudish thing going on.
Yeah.
To me, the distinction between marriage and not marriage is an absolutely arbitrary one. To me, it's...
For them, it wasn't arbitrary because they were a conservative Christian group. That was the cloak.
But everything else, except for that very fine line in my view.
It's religious box ticking. Going, this is okay because you're still married.
You know how many of those women, 0% of those women were comfortable with that. You know, exactly, and they had no choice. And how's that different from centrepoint women being forced to have, not forced, but pressured to have extremely promiscuous couple sharing, moving around it's just to me it's an arbitrary line. You know, I know it matters to some people, but for me the control of people's sexuality. No difference.
It's over the line of
it is. I'm
right and wrong.
I'm not at all condoning it, and I never would, because I look at the explosion of abuse that's occurred amongst the younger people, and there is a reason that occurred. There was a sexualised environment that began way back then. Now, when Hopeful Christian went off to prison and got put away, he did definitely tone that stuff down. That stuff came to a natural end, but it was too late by then.
Well, can we just jump back as well, because I feel like we haven't completely described some of the stuff. There was also open nakedness being encouraged in the swimming pool among all sorts of people who weren't married, and also
families. That was within families. So you would go to the spa and you'd be encouraged to have a family spa, and it would be encouraged for the children to sit there, and the parents would be, educating their children
naked and being sexual, and again. Hopeful Christian being present and being involved, him being in the pool, him being
were those instances.
All the naked children, him teaching boys how to masturbate, him teaching young couples about to get married how to have sex and how to pleasure one another. I just think we need to be really clear that it wasn't. This was extensive, highly sexualised environment.
Yes. And it was modelled, and the difference, to me, I'm sitting here knowing about Centrepoint, I was like, what?
It's the same.
It's the same. How is it any different?
Yeah. And, had a religious overtone.
Yeah, and maybe some of the rules and the practices were different, and they, like you say, they had the religious tick boxing exercise going on. But what I'm hearing is the individual's sexuality is not one that they have any control over.
No. And he was controlling it.
Yeah, he was completely controlling and defining the parameters of an individual, a couple, and a child's sexuality. So this is just like Centrepoint. You had to see other people having sex. It doesn't really matter that it was only your parents you were watching having sex. No. I mean, as a kid, who cares? The fact is, you were unable as a parent to be attuned to the needs of your child. So it's about attunement to what your children need. And this group has, and Centrepoint, both these groups have not allowed parents to have a natural attunement to the developing sexuality which is age appropriate for their child.
No.
A man at the top has decided, who has, let me point out, no background or knowledge of child development at all, a bit like Bert Potter at Centrepoint, literally ignorant about child sexual development, has imposed on children what is the right and appropriate thing at a developmental stage.
That's right.
And very clearly he was imposing things that were bringing him pleasure and that were appeasing his sexual appetite.
And that's why I maintain that under the cloak of this is education, this is good for Christians, it's within marriage. That's how he sold it. That's why the first generation bought it and didn't run. People went to Centrepoint knowing it was an open sexual commune. You were going to get sexual therapy. That's why you went there. People did not go to Gloriavale for that. They were there to live a righteous, holy, pure life and to serve the Lord, and he sold it to them. So that's why it matters. The first generation...
Must have been so confusing for them.
To this day, and you saw it in the documentary, the woman sitting in the dock during the employment court, and she talks about some of the sexual things that went on, and she said, I don't believe he ever did it with bad intentions. So to this day they hold that view because it comes under the cloak of acceptable Christian activity within the bounds of marriage. And can we point out, not all parents did it. Not all parents went to their bedrooms and actually forced their children to watch.
Yeah, that's right.
But some did. There was an expectation they should have. Some parents chose not to. So you do have variations within the group of Gloriavale. That did not occur inside some families. There were some families who did not go after the spa and involve themselves. There were some families who chose to go other places if they wanted to, have sexual activity between themselves as a couple. And so wow, okay. So he was then imprisoned in 1994 because of multiple counts of sexual abuse. And then there was they appealed, and it was quashed. The conviction was quashed on grounds that the jury was misdirected. I mean, it wasn't on. He never denied he did those things. I've read the court sentencing notes. He never denied it. It was just he denied the motivation was for sexual pleasure. He didn't have, he believed it was for education. He never denied he did those things. Yeah. And so it wasn't that he hadn't done these things. He got the appeal because apparently the jury was misdirected, and I can't quite fathom that. I've read the notes. I'm not a lawyer, clearly, but I thought the judge did a really good job at being clear and laying out what it was the jury was to find or not find. Anyway, it was quashed, and then they came back for another round, but by then multiple complainants, I don't know whether they chose not to, or it's pretty hard work going through a trial. I think after you've had an attempt or two at a trial, you're probably not signing up for another one. And so police went just with the most serious of the charges. And so he was again found guilty and spent another month or 3 or whatever in prison. I think in total it was like less than 18 months, may have been 11 months and then a few more months. And he comes out, and I'm just so disturbed by this. How did he come out in such a short amount of time when he had a 5-year sentence? I will never know. Everyone knew the man he was a con man. Originally it was 6 and it got reduced to 5 when there were less charges. How did he? They knew he was a con man. They knew he was a man. You hear me reading out some of the sentence. They used the words, he had domination over people. This was his dominion. They knew there was power and control. They obviously knew he was highly manipulative and a control man and a con man. And he must have conned the parole board and the probation services. I find that deeply disturbing. Then he goes back in and he lives back in that community. Like all I can think of.
So the convicted sex offender, who's clearly this is the leader. He's the leader of this little kingdom. Convicted sex offender is just allowed to go back there with no conditions.
He must have been on probation for a period after you come out of prison. If you don't serve your whole sentence, you do. You are under conditions, and the parole officers used to come.
Being not to have further.
They used to come and stay at the community and keep their eye and just have a visit. But he was a master at optics, and I'm so disturbed because I look now. What was just the news article last year, over 138 potential victims. I can tell you
of
it's
sexual
higher.
Abuse.
Sexual and physical abuse. It's higher than that.
Yeah.
That is not a fair number.
Because we all know how few people actually
So this is what the police are investigating, over 138 potential victims, over 400 crimes. At that point, 17 men had been charged through the courts already in the last year or two, and there were still 18 more under investigation. We're talking a hot pot. And you don't know about the 17.
This is 30 years after Hopeful Christian was convicted for these things. So what you're saying, and what this recent documentary in the last few days has showed, is that this culture that was set up under Hopeful Christian has just continued having ripple effects even after his death.
Yes, and it may have morphed and changed shape, but when you sexualise an entire community, when you have a patriarchal view, when you
have high control over members,
you have isolation.
Yeah.
you have all the factors for a hotbed of sexual abuse. Find me a cult
Perfect storm.
that doesn't have somewhere in there inappropriate
abuses of
sexual
power.
behaviour. And of course, there's always this emphasis, and I actually thought the documentary did well because I didn't feel like it was 3 nights of sexual expose, and it didn't need to be, because it's not the only type of abuse that's gone on in Gloriavale. And the abuse patterning got set up because of the huge spiritual and psychological abuse.
Control, yeah.
That control
Yes.
is what sets a scene for all the other control.
And actually, that's how it really hit me. The first line opening up, it showed, or one of the first few minutes of the documentary showed this young woman talking about how they would use newspapers, I think, in the kitchen, and how they would like snatch the opportunity to read information from the outside world, and how they then got discovered that they were doing this. And so she described how then the leaders would go through the newspapers and cut out anything that they thought might be a bad influence, or that they didn't want the young people reading about. And so and then she says that line, I remember it, she said it's all about control. And that's how the documentary opens.
Yes.
And it's like...
And Pilgrim Christian, he's in those opening scenes, and he talks about this being, it's the psychological barrier.
Yes.
Who needs a
locked gate, he said. Who needs a locked
And
gate?
he said it's a psychological prison way more powerful than a locked gate.
Yes.
The leaders tell you what to think.
Yeah.
My wife was like a puppet with strings attached.
Yes.
She was used as a weapon against me.
And didn't you see that when some of the court scenes were being shown, and a Gloriavale woman, Purity Valor, spoke, and she looked and she said, well, yes, we need to think the same.
Oh, yeah.
Act the same.
Believe the same. And she said, because then we have unity. And then one of the former members, it cuts to her, I think, and she said it's not unity, it's uniformity.
That's right.
What a line. Couldn't
Brilliant.
agree more.
So what you've seen, I think the documentary series wanted to draw a line from where we are today, just travel it back a few generations. Did you know? This is what happens. This is the trajectory for these kind of groups. And what happened when Hopeful Christian went off to prison, around that time is when they made the move from Springbank, Rangiora Cust, and they jumped over into the isolated Gloriavale.
Rebranding. That was not deliberate necessarily. That was just the timing of what.
I don't know when that... I'm suspicious about the purchase time of the Gloriavale community. I can't work out whether it was... whether Hopeful knew there was some charges coming, that he'd been involved in things.
Is rebranding so important? Like, think of the Children of God got rebranded as the Family International. It's a really good way to escape your history. And like, the problem with a documentary like this is it's moving into deliberately tracking the history so we can all remember how quickly we forget. And if you've been, there's been an active campaign of forgetting, which is what's been happening in Gloriavale the whole time. We forget, or we change the backstory to suit us. Like, the people in Gloriavale, while Hopeful Christian was in jail, I very much doubt any of them knew that he was in jail for sexual offences.
No, that's right. They were told he was being persecuted for their faith.
Exactly. So there's propaganda within, and there's active forgetting and shutting down of the victims.
And that generation must have made a pact with each other. We're never going to talk about that. And so their children and their children are reasonably unaware
active forgetting
of this.
Wow.
And then the rebranding, the Cust time, and the, now we're in the Gloriavale time. This is a new community.
Yes.
And what's going to happen next? Where are they moving next to rebrand?
They've got Lake Brunner. They've already purchased that, which is
and
about...
they'll call themselves a new name when they move there, no doubt.
Potentially. Obviously, you've got the Indian community, which we will talk about soon.
Let's move on to the next.
Well, do we talk about the Indian community now?
Yeah.
I got a lump in my stomach.
Absolutely shocking. Give us a summary for those who haven't seen it. Shocking.
I've known about the Indian community for years. It was an outreach. Indians came across to New Zealand as young children, or sort of heading into their teens. They
didn't come. They were recruited by Gloriavale. Gloriavale Hopeful Christian? He went over to India.
There were lots of trips, but essentially, possibly, and I'm not sure of the first beginning of the contact, it may have been someone in India who reached out and said, I love the look of your community. a relationship gets struck up, young people end up coming out on, I think, like school visas, like immigration for education.
Very young, 10,
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, but also some older teens. And they thought they were coming to do their schooling, but guess what? They got put on the workhorse machine. And so they're getting very little schooling, but they're working grueling hours, and they're working hard like the other Gloriavale children off the back of child labour.
So is this in the 90s?
This is in the 90s and potentially even into the 2000s. Yeah. They're coming here for what they think is one reason. They're being exploited by this group. And then a relationship strikes up with one of the kids, Faithful, and that is shown in the documentary as well.
In the third episode.
Yes.
So he's a young Indian boy. He came out over at, I think the documentary said 10 or 11, and you thought he was from an orphanage.
Yes, I understand there was an orphanage more in northern India, and so a relationship struck up. Hopeful took him under his wing, sort of groomed him up for.
So he was moved to the New Zealand community, and so there's this footage of him, this lone Indian boy among dozens, hundreds of Pakeha white European Gloriavale kids, and there's this lone Indian boy who's been brought over at such a young age, and he's just completely enmeshed into the Gloriavale community. Hopeful Christian puts him under his wing, trains him up with the doctrine and everything, makes him a little mini me.
The strategy behind that I find chilling. Like you planned it.
He did plan
it, and he knew he had 10 years to
what was his vision?
More than that, well, he had a list of who was going to marry who, and he must have been aware that there were teenagers leaving, and that there was a gap in the stock of available men for the woman to marry. And so it became very clear more Indians came over, and they started going over on mission trips to the orphanage in India, and then they decided that they would buy their own land in India, and it was an intentional community, that it would be a way to expand bloodlines for marriage, and an expression of their religious faith and fervour, that they would have more than one outpost and create the kingdom.
So the vision was to create another Gloriavale branch in India.
Absolutely.
And you're saying that you think one of the big motivators was to also increase the bloodline.
That's what was said in Gloriavale, and the girls knew that. And so then Hopeful would hold meetings. We need girls to go to India. Who wants to go? And no one puts their hand up. So then a week or two later, he has another meeting and another call. And at the end of 3 months, you've got girls sort of putting their hands up. God's will.
One of the things that was so heartbreaking was, I think it was Theo, a former member, described how her sister had said yes to going to India, and how she said, in Theo's perspective, she was saying that she thinks that for her sister, it felt like an escape from the New Zealand Gloriavale community, because life was so hard there, and Theo described how their family was, there was aspects of violence and abuse in her immediate family, and so actually for this sister, this Indian option of going to India was an escape, even though really anyone can see it's going from the frying pan to the fire. But
in their view, remember that when life gets really tough in there, you're on the edge of
God.
You're on the edge of despair, though. There is a lot of suicidal ideation in people, and you heard that in the doco. Yeah. And so if you think, could life be any worse than what it is for me here now? Surely not.
Yeah.
And so India becomes an option of, it couldn't be any worse, and maybe it might be better, and at least I won't be under the of the leadership over here. I think that's something I need to point out. We're talking about all the sexual stuff with Hopeful. Yes, Hopeful has died. I get it. But those leaders who are in power now knew they were leaders back then. Yeah. Or they were teenagers
who were victimised.
Who were probably victimised. They know
perpetrators
about they know about that past.
Yeah.
And so they are still in leadership. So that's where you've got danger. It's not necessarily that those leaders continued on in the exact same way. And obviously there are some other leaders that have come up under some fire, but on the whole, the wider leadership,
they know about it.
They enabled it.
They're committed to hiding it.
And they created and continue with the psychological abuse, which just sets the scene. Yeah. So they are enablers.
Yeah, and so going back to this Indian thing, because that to me, Gloriavale, New Zealand is shocking and appalling, and but we've heard about this
stuff. But we've changed. It's historical.
No, but for me, the India story just took the heartbreak to another level. And so again, for watchers or listeners, go and check it out. It is unreal. So where they then fast forward, they go from showing this young Indian boy, and then they fast forward, and two former members of Gloriavale, two women, Rosanna and Theo, go over to India to try to see their sister and their cousin, and they go with a couple of people with hidden cameras, and so they have footage of this Indian Gloriavale commune, and it's way in the rural India commune, gated community. They're all in blue dresses and they're in the same clothes,
and they're eating Kiwi food. They're not even allowed.
They described how they're not allowed to eat Indian food because
Hopeful didn't like it.
As a bunch of these high control groups sometimes do, there's heavily racist elements which they then overlay with religious beliefs. So she said that Indian food wasn't Christian. So
there's 5 families, 5 Kiwi women with Indian husbands, many of whom have disabilities. And
which isn't a bad thing in itself, but it's.
But she described in there how.
Well, she described how
stuck her sister is.
Yeah, she described that 3 of these men are severely crippled from polio. For example, one cannot walk without crutches and that sort of thing, and how even if they were to leave in India, employment opportunities for those men would be either non-existent or severely restricted. And so, she was describing that in the context of how stuck these women are.
And there's 32 children.
32 children.
They've had 32 born there. There's, I think, around 26 there currently.
People have families left.
People have been leaving the Indian community because they did recruit Indians as well. But over time, they've all disappeared. In the last few years, they've just been bailing. Same situation that's been happening here, leaving without anything.
So the ones that are left behind are these 5 families with the most, who are theoretically, I would imagine, the most stuck. 5 Kiwi women who don't even know where their passports are, who've got somewhere between...
Well, one of them said she did think her passports were in the office.
She doesn't know, really. Yeah. With children who may or may not have passports or birth certificates, with husbands who potentially have no power themselves in the Indian society.
Yeah.
And...
no finances.
All the same isolation issues of the New Zealand Gloriavale community. Can't drive, a long way away, no money, no understanding of the social system outside of the social system they're in, plus no language.
And then all just as a woman
flight.
as well, there's this heavy thing being laid on them of your job is to breed like crazy to increase this kingdom. And so these women are popping out baby after baby after baby.
But the Lord's coming back, Lindy.
And again, who knows what kind of healthcare they're receiving?
No.
They'll be home birthing and not necessarily receiving adequate medical care. And then
definitely not receiving adequate medical care.
Yeah, definitely not. And you just look at these women, and it's odd, right? We talked about how the camera cuts to these 2 former members walking in, and they're confident. Of course they look different. They're not in the Gloriavale dresses and they've got makeup on and that kind of thing. But these Gloriavale women just look at them and you can see they're trying to process. Liz made the comment to me yesterday that she would have thought that the Gloriavale sister would have hopped up and hugged her sister, and instead she just sort of looks at her and is really kind of expressionless. And I said, well, I can understand that a little bit, that she would have been in shock and processing, because I know that for myself, especially now that I'm what the exclusive brethren call an opposer, someone who speaks up about some of the injustices that we believe in these communities, if I was to see a family member, they probably wouldn't rush and hug me because I am a threat to them. And so I think that probably the Gloriavale sister was processing all those things whoa. And she said, what are you doing here, eh?
She hadn't seen her sister for 7 years.
Precious
hasn't seen her. And so what you've got is Precious has gone to India. I'm sure Precious doesn't have a phone. And
Precious?
She hasn't been keeping...
Oh, sorry, the one in Gloriavale,
Yeah, Indian Gloriavale.
Yeah.
I'm sure she hasn't been keeping up to date with all the news or keeping in sync with even what's happening. And so I guess she'd spoken to her sister twice in that 7 years
for a minute or 2 on the phone.
That's it. So she's been probably quite ignorant, Precious, of what Theo may have even been doing in speaking up, or so I still would have thought there might have been, even though she knew her sister had left,
Right.
it wasn't like at the forefront of her mind, my sister is an opposer.
Right.
She hadn't watched, Doco wasn't out then, but there was just
Nothing.
It was just
she looked exhausted. She looked absolutely exhausted.
You've made your way here.
She's in total survival.
Entrapped, and the survival is, and you hear it a lot, the Lord is coming back.
That is the mechanism.
It's a thought-stopping cliche. It is what Gloriavale has told its people. The Lord's coming back. You can just suffer a little more. Make sure you stay here. Don't leave Gloriavale. The Lord's coming back soon.
Come back.
Clearly, the end of the end of the world's coming. COVID's here.
Soon.
Don't leave this property.
So another really concerning thing in that third documentary in the Indian community was this sexualized thing came back because so this young Indian boy who's grown up and is now the leader of the community, and he's taken on the name of Faithful. His name is Faithful Disciple, right? So
Faithful Stronghold.
Faithful Stronghold. So he's in his 30s or 40s. He looks like an Indian man, and he takes aside Theo and Rosanna to quiz them about what have you come for, and he says some really interesting things. Obviously, he doesn't know he's being recorded.
No.
And he uses this expression. He says, "I've something like I've got the children to think of. You've come over here, and my children are here.
Are you a wolf?"
And he says, "Are you a wolf at the door? I've got to protect my children." And I was like, that as a picture, he is actually very open. He wasn't hiding that. To be in that community and to have someone come in as a threat, and you're a wolf at the door, and then
says, "Are you okay? Are you safe?
Yeah,
Am I okay with
you?
you?
Yeah, what are you doing here?" And then Theo says, She's very open, and she says, "I'm really concerned about sexual abuse for my nephews and nieces and my sisters.
I need to know they're safe.
I need to know they're safe." And then he says this strange thing. You have to go and watch it. But he just says this weird thing where he's just sort of like,
He says, what is rape?
Well, he says, what is rape? Rape comes from the man. And he said, the women here have struggled because of a culture of basically...
Well, he says Indian men do force themselves on Indian women. It is harder to be a woman in this society.
Yeah, so he basically just sort of loosely just sort of says, rape and sexual power dynamics are here, and he doesn't deny it at all, which just leaves the question hanging. There's these women and 32 beautiful young children, these gorgeous young girls, and the vulnerability is just, you just think, look, what is going on? And you think of the history of Gloriavale in New Zealand, and for me, I sit there and go, that community is not safe in India. Those women are not safe. Those children are not safe. The boys and the girls. What can we do about it, Liz? I just want action. I can't bear sitting here. What can be done?
It made me feel hopeless.
Absolutely.
The Indian bit. I just sunk to a sort of a new level of, I have some hope for Gloriavale here in New Zealand because of the standards that we expect as New Zealanders for New Zealanders. That gives me a sense of hope. But what I feel hopeless about, absolutely, those 5 women and their children, I just think it's hopeless feeling for me. But then I also think about these kids who are in Gloriavale right now, and the plans of those leaders for their lives. We already know that they're making plans. We already know they're strategic, and that they have showed evidence of a missional approach. Are their children in Gloriavale, his future is in some remote location in the world where they will just be breeding machines and victims, day-to-day victims of oppression, exploitation and abuse. I don't know if this is sexual trafficking because there's no money being exchanged. But
what is the currency?
But there is a transaction. These women are being sold
used
for money, but they're a transactional object.
For their wombs. It's their wombs.
For someone else's dream of expanding the kingdom of God. But they've sold it to them in this religious cloak, and that's the difficulty. These indoctrinated people actually believe the indoctrination.
It is trafficking, in my view.
Well, it's just not legally, because I don't know, because there's no money being exchanged.
But their wombs are being used.
I think you can say there are probably issues of some forced or coerced marriage. Now that is, again, there's a crimes. That's a crime.
But they'll say that they willingly chose it. It was the will of God. They'll say they willingly chose it.
But then you pull out Dr. Norris's psychiatrist's report from the employment case where she said inside a high control group, really, there is no
choice. And actually, I think it was Pilgrim Christian on the documentary, he's a former member, and he sort of smirks or smiles wryly. And I think he was talking about something like marriage, and he said it's a Gloriavale choice. He said it's obey the leaders or go to hell.
What does Jan Jelic call it?
A bounded choice.
Bounded
choice where you...
What is, and Gloriavale's lawyer himself said it's a stark choice.
Really?
Stark.
A stark choice.
It is no choice, quite frankly. So there are potentially crimes, because some of the marriages did not occur in India. Some actually occurred in New Zealand, and then the couple went to India, but some did occur in India. I think it's extremely complex. I see no other option rather than a diplomatic solution here. Surely the woman and the children, and I guess the husband, there needs to be some provision for them to at least be bought.
But the husbands don't want to. Faithful said, they said to him, the sisters said to him, can our sisters ever come back to New Zealand? And he said no, the commitment was to come to India. And why should he come to New Zealand if that's his home country and he wants to stay there? He's not going to want to move to freezing cold back blocks of the West Coast.
He's not going to want to go back in under the leaders at Gloriavale.
No, he's got his kingdom. He's the king of that little palace.
He is. He's got the control of the finances. New Zealand has been funding this community.
Shocking.
Recall 50,000 a month for many years. I think that's the amount.
Well, that's going to change with Gloriavale starting to lose money.
Definitely. And there has been a distancing between the two communities. Over COVID, they weren't able to go with their groups of... So the girls and boys from Gloriavale as teens and early 20s have been going over there supporting in a missional sort of way, going on trips. But the last 2 or 3 years, there have been very few of those trips. So they've been quite isolated, the Indian community, and he's got no one looking over his shoulder. He's the king. He makes the rules. He's not going to want to come back under fervent, steadfast Howard Temple.
So I'm thinking now, hopefully a lot of New Zealanders are going to watch this or have watched this and may well be moved. I hope.
Yes.
I hope they're moved, and I hope that their response is not much like when we see something on the news and we kind of go, that's terrible, that's horrible, they feel outraged, but tomorrow they forget. There was a fantastic article written 2 days ago by Dennis Gates in The Scoop. I encourage you to read it. And Dennis Gates is in the legal team for Gloriavale, so he has a right to say something.
Gloriavale Leavers.
Yeah, sorry, Gloriavale Leavers. And I'm just going to read the last part of his quote in this article. Really, he's addressing the New Zealand public, and the New Zealand's public is habit to get some entertainment out of these stories, and we're trying to remind people that these are people's lives. This is now, and the media are only the town crier. In the marketplace, in the village centre, they are the town crier, telling everyone it is the role of the village to do something, not just to listen to the town crier and get some buzz out of it, but actually to act. And he has said, this is a very cynical part of his article, governments of the last 50 years have also ignored the plight of the inmates of Gloriavale. So I guess it's okay for you to do the same. Women's rights groups and advocates in New Zealand have done nothing for the women of Gloriavale, so it must be all right for you to do the same. The strident Māori rights movement has done nothing for the tangata whenua in Gloriavale, so it must be all right for you to do the same. The unions have done nothing for the people of Gloriavale, so it must be all right for you to do the same. The government agencies have watched, they've talked, reported, then watched some more, talked some more, reported some more, and then done nothing. So it must be all right for you to do the same. Only it's not. That's Dennis talking to you, New Zealand.
There are people assisting those leaving Gloriavale, but we always need more support.
So the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, you can look up their website, follow them on social media. They're doing incredible work supporting these people when doing the government's job, really, stepping into the breach here and supporting these families and these children who are leaving with all kinds of things, right? You do. Tell us what you do. It's such a wide variety of things. You set up people with complete house loads, help them get their driver's licenses, birth certificates, as well as a whole lot of mental and emotional and psychological support for people, long-term follow-up.
Yeah,
Give us your spiel, Liz. Tell us what else you do with the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust.
Well, if you watch Escaping Utopia, you'll see us in action. You'll actually see us in a vehicle with a trailer, and we've taken it across to the West Coast, and we've got 2 house loads that are getting set up. Everything from, anything practical. You just imagine if you're an alien landing on a planet and you need to begin a life, and we have access to that. We only have access to that because of our New Zealand community. They have been amazing. We're constantly being offered furniture and items, and so I guess at the moment we are launching a campaign to help our finances. These are difficult economic circumstances at the moment, and the grant funding pots are dwindling. It's harder to get that sort of funding now, so we're just relying so heavily on each person who's moved in their heart to donate $5, $10, $15, $20. Join our pledge club. $10 a week, $10 a month. Give our trust the certainty we need to employ staff. We've just taken on a new staff member for the West Coast. We're primarily based on the East Coast where leavers have been coming out, but they've been spilling out a few kilometres or even into Greymouth, away from Gloriavale on the West Coast. There was an urgent need for our group to have a pastoral care worker, someone who can be called in an instant to go and attend to people's the mental health needs or their physical needs. And I think we just need funding for that. We have staff, we have operational costs, we do a lot of trips to the coast, that's petrol money. There's just no ways to describe how much good we can do with more resourcing and finances.
What surprised you guys both about the documentary, and what might you take away today? What's the surprising thing?
Oh, well, the need is stark, the need is real, and so I think head over to the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust and jump on there, give a little and give something. It's going to make a difference to this incredibly odd, needy part of New Zealand society.
Yeah, I was surprised about the extent of the mission of Gloriavale, that they've got to India, and the hopelessness of that community. That surprised me. I thought I knew the story fairly well, that we need this group to stop and to stop with their strategic mission, and we need there not to be 5 more or 10 more or 20 more New Zealand girls in that kind of extraordinary, stuck, trapped environment.
I think you said in the documentary, we can't be here in 30 years, and we can't be here in 10 years.
No. We can't discover 5 more Indian Gloriavales.
We need the people in power to do something. If you're in power,
be courageous.
To do something, stand up and do something about this.
There are difficult decisions to be made, and you are sitting in the seat of power, and you can make these difficult decisions. And that's the challenge, to be courageous. Your hands aren't entirely tied. That's not true. And it's time.
Stop the abuse.
Yeah, and I think, you asked what was surprising. Sadly, none of that was surprising. All 3 episodes. I've heard all those stories. I've heard more than that. People say, why has Liz Gregory got to be in a bonnet? I know far too much. Far too much. So we just need people to be courageous. So join us on this mission. Liberation, freedom. These are good things that society should be involved in. But please be kind. If you're down the street and you see a woman in a blue dress, do not pour your wrath and scorn on her. She is an entrapped lady. She doesn't have a mind of her own. She has no potential capacity to get out and make a difference for her life. Show her kindness, love, care and compassion. That's what changes the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I would encourage listeners to consider supporting the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust. In the current economic crisis, funding is getting harder and harder. There's a Give a Little page currently open for your donations, that you'll find a link on their website to that. We hope there's been something in today's episode that has helped you to cult-proof your life. Keep listening to more episodes of Cult Chat on the Plains FM website, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also now watch Cult Chat on YouTube if you want.
And don't forget to join us. We're going to be having more conversations about Escaping Utopia. We want to talk to some of the cast and the producer of the series, Natalie Malcon. So we want to have some great discussions around that. So join us again for another episode soon.
Ka kite.
Ka kite anō.
Bye.
anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.